Hello there and welcome to this vlog of February 2022, and today's topic will be on painting in BattleTech. I'm going to split it into two. So firstly, I'm just going to very kind of quickly go through some techniques to help you improve as a painter. I'm not going to show any examples or change camera angles and show actual brush technique or anything like that though, because I'm not set up to do that. I'm also not good enough to do that. So I'm just going to very quickly talk about some basics to get you from very for want of a better term, bad painter to a very adequate tabletop painter, and it's super easy. The second topic I'm then going to discuss is kind of finding inspiration for your paint schemes of your BattleTech forces. I'm going to discuss how to kind of balance it between the lore and your own kind of personal journey into BattleTech, and not just finding those specific paint schemes, but kind of going into some detail on how to kind of get the enthusiasm to go through with it and do it, because I know a lot of people struggle getting the energy and the inspiration to paint. So I'm going to touch on that a little bit, on how I kind of use almost my own personal BattleTech narrative that I've kind of created in that sandbox galaxy, whatever you want to call it, to really kind of push me to want to paint my forces. It's quite an abstract thing, but I find it very useful. So I'm going to hopefully impart that knowledge off to you, and you may find it useful as well. Anyway, first of all, let's talk about some very basic techniques. And again, I really need to emphasize I am not a painting expert, hence why I ain't going to show you any tutorials, because there are people, especially on YouTube, who are brilliant at painting and can teach you a million times better than I ever could, and have kind of the setup to do that. That's not the intention of what I'm going to talk about here. It's just to very quickly go through some techniques that you can look up to go from literally not very good to completely okay. Now, I consider myself completely okay as a painter. I can pretty much paint very, very quickly, which is a massive asset. I never kind of underestimate that as a skill, because my pile of shame is always really quite low. And that's because I feel like I've got quite a nice balance between getting the motivation to do it, doing it quickly, and doing a completely okay job. Obviously, you're going to be sat slightly different on that spectrum, no doubt. So your quality levels might be higher than mine, ergo you have to paint slower. Or you might be the inverse of that. And ultimately, they're your models, it's your hobby, so you do what you want to do. What I'm going to talk about here, though, is, and I don't want it to sound snipey, because I'm not generally a snipey person. I don't really adhere to that kind of way of doing things. It's not very productive. So when I say this, I want to kind of, please keep in mind, it's not meant as a slur. It's meant as an observation, which I think the community can kind of help you get better at. And that observation is that there are a lot of pretty bad painters in BattleTech. And you see that a lot. I mean, if you follow social media channels, or if you're on Reddit, someone will post something and I'll be looking at it and I know what vision they had for it, but unfortunately they've not been able to carry it out. And I always think that's I mean, some people might look at that and get quite angry. I certainly don't feel angry. I just feel quite it's going to sound really patronising, but I feel quite sad for that person that they've spent all that money and then invested all that time into making something that, if you went up to a tournament or something like that, human behaviour as it is, people are going to be looking at that collection and being like, did that person's child actually paint this? So, it's for want of a better kind of way of phrasing this, if you want to not be that person who might have to suffer that embarrassment, because I don't think I'd particularly like that if people were kind of looking at my models and being like, how did you even mess this up so badly? There are some super easy techniques, again, to go from bad to just okay. And I kind of, you can use kind of a spectrum to do this, and I'll do this for the sake of like simplicity. But let's kind of go on a scale from 1 to 10. 1 being like those comedy photos and memes of like space marines with like super thick paint smeared all over them and like face just dotted on there. Like that's like your level 1. So that's like somebody who has literally never even held a paintbrush before and just butchers what they're trying to do because they've got no experience of it and they don't know any of the tricks. And then the absolute inverse of that is like award-winning, amazing paint jobs, a 10. And you see them occasionally. There are some in BattleTech. I think there are some paint jobs that I've seen recently that have really, really impressed me. I think with BattleTech, though, I think as an average, it kind of sits around a 3 or a 4. That's kind of from my previous like tabletop experiences with BattleTech. Although granted, because I kind of got back into the hobby predominantly in a COVID world, I've not really been able to do much like recent tabletopping. But when I was a kid, I remember, if we ever used to play BattleTech, people's collections used to be pretty ropey in terms of paint jobs. Whereas if people were playing things like Warhammer 40,000, or I actually used to play the 6mm game of that, which was I believe called Space Marine. Which I sold years and years ago, and it's kind of similar to BattleTech in its like interpretation, like big titans, and there's like little tanks and little space marines and orcs and things like that. But I remember going to like Games Workshop and seeing people's collections and thinking they're really well painted, even for like 90s, which had a much more rustic feel as far as painting goes. And almost like a cartoonish element to them than kind of the modern Games Workshop models, which generally tend to be much more like professionally painted and just much. Well, the models are a lot better for one, and that obviously makes a world of difference. Model quality as well. I'll touch on that before I get into this. Model quality is really important, and this is why I think this is actually quite good timing to do a video like this, because Catalyst have obviously now catapulted like the BattleTech hobby into a different sphere. Previously, you had pretty ropey metal or plastic models. I say that as somebody who is actually a fan of a lot of the old metal models. There are some ones that are fantastic, but in terms of like scaling and detail, most of them are not very good. I've said this before. I think there was an era. I'm guessing it was like in the early 2000s where I think the metal models were actually fantastic. I've got multiple ones in my force. I've got things like the Nightgear, which I think is a much actually better model than the new one. It's got far more like stature to it. It's got a comically large UAC-10 on its right arm, which really makes me laugh. It's like, what is this thing firing out of that gun? It looks like it could fire like a golf buggy or something like that. It's absolutely huge. On the new model, though, I think the new model of the Nightgear is it's one of the very few models I think they got the scaling wrong on. Like, it just doesn't look like a 75-ton mech. So, I'm not crucifying the old metal models here. They did have obviously a revamp and do some like plastic starter sets several years ago. The ones that I've seen of them have not impressed me. So this recent endeavor by Catalyst, though, in terms of the Kickstarter, is absolutely incredible. I mean, the plastic is as good as anything being produced by probably what I consider like the two best model designing companies in the world. I'll say the actual games as opposed to the people that produce them, and that's to me Age of Sigmar and Malifaux. I think both of those model sets are absolutely incredible. I don't play either game, but my goodness, the quality on some of those designs is incredible. Again, regardless of what you think of things like Age of Sigmar, I know that's not the most popular gaming system amongst hobby enthusiasts generally. I think because obviously it destroyed the old world, and a lot of people are still bitter towards that. But just in terms of model quality, it's brilliant. I genuinely think now that the BattleTech models that Catalyst have done are right up there with anything that the best producers in the world are doing, and that makes a huge difference because If you have got a good model to paint that's got things like recesses in the plastic, it means that you can use like techniques to really kind of make them pop much easier than you can do with like a metal model that's got like just very straight edge surfaces where you're going to have to apply your own detail, which obviously takes a lot more time. So all that being said, I'm just going to concentrate on a few things that if you know about these, then you'll find this boring, but I'm going to kind of do this in like 5 minutes. So I'll move on to kind of the inspiration topic shortly. But a few things that really can improve you as a painter and are super easy. And the first one, and without a doubt the most important one, is thin your paint. I will repeat that. Thin your paint. If you use thick paint on a model, and what I mean by that is, let's say you're using like the Citadel range, which a lot of people do because it's the kind of the easiest one to get. I mean, generally it's very expensive because you're paying, I mean, in Britain we pay maybe like £2.50 for like a little pot. Obviously, if you use like a hobby shop, you'll probably go and buy like in bulk the paints that you want. For sake of ease though, because it comes in liquid form, usually, obviously, if you were doing model painting at its like most like intrinsic, you'd be using like paste as paint and like thinning it yourself. Obviously, Citadel kind of do a lot of that process for you. So just in terms of like, it's like the painting equivalent as fast food, right? Like you just open it up, there's your burger or sandwich or whatever else, as opposed to you having to kind of go and sauce it and then do a lot of the kind of grind to get the colours you want and things like that. So I personally do use Citadel paints. I like them. I use Army paints. Is it Army Painter? I can't remember what they're actually called. I've not bought anything from them for a while, but I've got quite a lot of that like in my like painting itinerary as well. So when you've kind of found the paint that works for you, and presumably it's going to be one of those quick fix hobby paints like Citadel, the first thing to do, and I do this on every single one of them, is I transfer it from the horrible little pots that they're in that dry up very, very quickly. And I put some like Flow Aid in there. So just, it's pretty cheap, is Flow Aid, for about equivalent to like $10-15, £10, whatever. You can get like a little bottle of it, and you put like several drops of that into the paint, transfer it over to dropper bottles. And that gives you then a much more like secure painting like setup, because it's much, it's quite a controversial factor, is this, because a lot of people will say things like, oh, well, the paint doesn't dry out because you've got like a proper screw fit cap on there. The paint will dry out, because what happens is, in terms of like the science of the paint, oxygen gets into the like the container, and as you use the paint and that space increases, and ergo more oxygen is in there, there is more oxygen to dry out the paint, basically. So the further you go down there, that's why if you only got like a quarter of an inch left in a bottle, it will seem like it's getting a little bit like scrunchy and disgusting, because that's basically the oxygen attacking it, for want of a better term. So you're never going to really get around that as such. But just in terms of like application, having the dropper bottle that's kind of got the Flow Aid paint in there, remember to put a couple of ball bearings in there as well. That's like super important, so that when you shake it, you can kind of get it nice and thin when you kind of put it onto your wet palette or your regular palette, whatever you use. But that will make a huge difference, because you will immediately, by using thin paint on that scale, go from a 1 to a 3. I guarantee it's that simple, it's that easy. Thin your paint. Sometimes you might thin it a little bit too much, so everything looks a little bit too like transparent, if you want to put it that way, when you're kind of applying. Obviously, there is like an experience factor with this. It's also, when you use certain paints, you'll know that they need more like Flow Aid or thinning out or whatever than other types of paint. So it's just kind of getting the balance on that and learning from experience. If you do like dilute it too much, I mean, you might have to kind of go back and give it a second coat, which, as long as you've got like something like a hairdryer or a fan nearby, where, I mean, I do that like as part of the course. I've got a fan on my painting table that I'll put all my models in front of to dry them out a lot quicker. So I'm quite happy to let them dry and then like apply another coat. It only takes maybe, if you're doing say like a couple of lances, might take you like an extra 25 minutes in the entire process. And then the next time I get it, I might buy that paint again, for instance, and top it up. Or if it's run out, I might put less flow aid in there. I kind of keep a little notebook on that just so I kind of know those things without having to remember them. Getting old now, so you know, bad memory is a thing. So that's the first thing. Second thing is learn and appreciate and love the washes, or the shades, or whatever else you want to call them. Now, this is where it comes into play with having a good model, because if you have a model like the new Catalyst sculpts that have got recesses on there and detail, when you apply a wash, which is effectively, I don't even know how to kind of scientifically give a description of a wash. Basically, the paint separates so that the darker parts of the paint go into the recesses of the model, which makes everything stand out and look three-dimensional. They are fantastic. I mean, the first time I ever used a wash, it was like learning how to do an amazing magic trick, because it just straight away, again, it will take you from a 3 to a 4 or a 5, like that, like super quickly. There are different ways to apply washes. You can also use different colours or different kinds of washes for different colours. I don't tend to do that. I'm pretty sloppy with my washes, so I will kind of just buy. I use two. I use Agrax Earthshade. I can never remember how to say that. And Nuln Oil, which are kind of the two famous ones from Citadel. And I literally just like slop it on. In fact, if I could get away with it, I'd just dip them into it and then shake them and then clean up the model, because the clean-up part of it is important. What I mean by that is like, if you are going to sloppily apply a wash, if you want to kind of get up to a 5 or a 6 standard of painting, which is kind of where I sit, you really kind of need to go back and like tidy up the model with, like either using a highlighted paint. So if you were using like a darker green, you'd use like one slightly lighter shade to do like the tinting or the edge highlighting or whatever you want to call it. I don't really go in for like really sophisticated edge highlighting, because I think that kind of gets you up to a 7 or an 8 then. But then the speed of which you can paint is dramatically decreased, because that's when you're kind of really getting into detail. Instead, I do the final little trick here, which is, of course, dry washing, or dry brushing, or whatever you want to call it. Dry brushing is when you take like a metallic paint. You could use this for any paint, but generally you take a metallic paint, get like a piece of kitchen paper. Always better to use kitchen paper as well. If you just use regular like bathroom paper, it doesn't really have that kind of like absorbent to kind of suck up the excess paint. And you can use like a bigger brush. I've heard a lot of people say that they use like makeup brushes. I just kind of use like a smaller brush to do it. It's a specialized like dry brush, but I think any kind of like makeup brush would do. Dip it in the paint, basically run it over the kitchen towel until you just get like until it's dry, basically, clues in the title, and then you basically just run it over the model. And what you'll find is that really gives like, it makes your models pop. And all those kind of little bits of detail just like made more pronounced against the washes in the recess. If you follow those like little tips and tricks there, you will literally, I guarantee to you, if you go on YouTube and have a look like how to wash a model, how to dry brush, thin your paint, that kind of, those 3 things, you will automatically become a much better painter, and you'll have a much better experience with it, because, and this segues me very nicely to like the inspirational side of this, how to get inspiration to do it. The worst possible thing that you can do is, let's say you have a project, whether it's BattleTech or anything else, and you do it and you spend several hours doing it, and you look back at the end of it and think that looks like garbage. What happens to you then? Well, you become utterly deflated, demoralised, and you probably will be hurting so badly you won't go back to the hobby table for a considerable amount of time. And that's why I said when I was mentioning sometimes you'll see people putting paint jobs up that really don't look very good. I feel sad for them because I don't believe they could have looked at that and taken like any great like source of pride from it, really. And again, I'm not saying that as a slur. I'm just saying it as like I want them to feel pride when they do it. So just following some very basic tips, which will actually speed your painting process up considerably. So you not only get a better result, but it's quicker. You know, like using a wash is just literally slapping paint on a model. You don't have to be sophisticated about it. Then, you know, it's that little thing of if you continually keep battering yourself with like bad experiences, you're obviously not going to have any kind of motivation to go back. So if you though can get that to the end of that company or lance or whatever else it is you're doing, and you look at it and you think that looks really great, I personally always feel that way about my models, and they don't particularly look fantastic. I mean, they're very much like a 5 or a 6 on the spectrum that I talked about, but I get inspiration in kind of another way, which is tying what I am doing to like my wider sandbox BattleTech user experience, if you want to put a funny, weird, corporate type term on it. Now, what do I mean by that? And if you've watched my previous, like, how to project manage your BattleTech forces, you'll probably know what I'm going to say here. And that's that when I've done, like, the dust counters as a like a mercenary unit, and they're the unit that I collect for, so to speak, I actually just finished them. So I created the full reinforced battalion over the last week, which I'm like super proud of. It's taken me, I think the first model I painted for it in terms of the new sculpts and getting into it was when I got a game of Armoured Combat, because obviously that's got the catapult in there, and that is the kind of first mech, my favourite mech as well from the Inner Sphere. So like that was, I think, probably the first model that I painted for the kind of this new kind of journey into BattleTech that I've done over the last few years. That will have been maybe 1.5 years ago, and I literally just finished it this week when I created the reinforced battalion. However, when I first started thinking about getting the dust counters back on tabletop, and I really wanted to kind of have like a decent force, my intention wasn't to go the full reinforced battalion. At first I just wanted a couple of companies, and then it kind of like spiraled out from there. And even if I think you watch my video from probably like 3 or 4 months ago, the first video that I did on project managing BattleTech forces, if you look at like the dust counter force at that time, it's tiny. It's literally just like several models. I think maybe I can't remember, maybe 12, 16 models, something like that. What I then did though is when the kind of and there was a logistic element to why I did that, because we weren't sure of any of us about how easy it would be to get the new Catalyst sculpts. Now though, Catalyst have completely hit it out of the park, and they seem to be everywhere, so amazing. So as soon as I kind of saw that was coming, as soon as I saw those numbers as well, that the Catalyst were doing reprints like several thousand for each box set, I kind of knew that I could go all in on that. And my dream when I was a kid, this is going to sound quite sad, dream when most people have dreams of like walking on the moon or something. One of my dreams was to have the reinforced battalion for the dust counters, because I really wanted to like show their journey through the ages that I'm interested in with BattleTech, which again I parrot this all the time, but from 3025 to 3067, and they kind of grow with me along that journey. So they start out with like a very like simple like heavy medium lance, and as we go through the kind of the different time periods, they add to that force. For instance, like after the clan invasion, the entirety of C Company is clan Mechs. And what I did when I really started to kind of think about this over the last few months, and I had kind of the layout when I was a kid. I'd kind of created the reinforced battalion for them, but I didn't know anything like as much about BattleTech as I do now. So a lot of it was like lacking or incorrect. So I kind of went back in and changed a lot of that. And I really started to to develop some of the narrative lore around them as well, to a point where like each lance within each company has its own story to tell. And that's really the crux of what I want to talk about here, which is that getting the inspiration to do it. Well, I'll give you one like very quick example of what I did. And I was lucky that I was able to do this because I found someone in the US who posted me the Wolf's Dragoons set, which is only available in Barnes. Excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat. Which is only available in Barnes and Noble. They don't deliver to Europe, so I had to get someone from the US to send me that, which meant I was able to get the Annihilator, which is a mech that I always wanted. Like, I really, really like the Annihilator. I just love the way that it looks. And I put that into my force, and what I did, I'll give you a very quick, and I mean quick as well, I won't go into detail on this because it will bore you. But in my second company, there were a group of 4 mechs that form a lance, who I've painted slightly differently from the rest of the battalion. Like, the colour scheme is generally like purple and yellow, and every mech has that feel to them. But they've got like a metallic body. All 4 of these mechs, it's an Annihilator, a Marauder 2, a Crockett, and a Stalker. So 200 ton mechs, 285 ton mechs. They don't actually belong to the Dust Counters. They actually belong to 2 like very shady archaeologists that the Dust Counters come across. And long story, I'm not going to go into the detail of it, but they agree to kind of fly the Dust Counters colours for a time, but they're not really part of the company as such. And it's not archaeologists who are piloting the mechs, they actually are piloted by like 4 gladiator mech warriors. And they're kind of archaeologists attached to interstellar expeditions who are like a bit of a shady group within the BattleTech universe, and they're kind of lost tech hunting. And again, like, my narrative for that is tied in, so my story for that lance of mechs is tied into their colour scheme, and that really gives me the inspiration to paint them, because as I'm kind of fleshing things out and writing like narrative sections for my kind of BattleTech journey, I then really want to get them on the, on my painting table, so that I can get them on tabletop if I want to play like narrative games or anything like that. And it just gives so much more character to what you are doing if you tie it in. It also means if you do that, and again, every single one of the lances that I've created has their own little story to tell, either in terms of the mechs that are there or the decals that I'm using on them. Decals, by the way, another good way to give easy character to a mech. Sometimes called transfers as well, but I call them decals. Because everyone's got like a story to tell, it just infuses me and gets my kind of like creativity surging when I'm thinking about painting schemes for them. And how to kind of best like visualize that like narrative that I want to kind of tell. And to that end, if I really ramped it up like over the last like few months. In fact, in terms of painting, I went and stripped a lot of my original paint jobs, which were completely fine, but I had like different colour schemes in mind. And really, I've really focused on the Dust Counters like reinforced battalion over the last like 6 weeks, basically since Christmas. And I was like, I got it done like really, really quickly. And I think a lot of that ties into the fact that I'd been writing kind of, not so much stories, but kind of like an outline of narratives for each of those lances or each of those companies, and when they kind of came around and at what time and what impact they had on the Dust Counters, what even to the granular level of who pilots that particular mech, who is the mech warrior attached to that particular mech. And it gives you it gives you much more of a like an interesting journey, I feel, in terms of what you are doing. And it certainly inspires me. And like I say, if you are having trouble getting motivated for painting, whether it's like just a company or a battalion, or I don't know how people do this, a regiment, which is 3 battalions usually, which is a lot of painting. But kudos to you if you can do that. Luckily for me, in terms of my narrative, the Dust Counters never got bigger than a battalion, so I don't have to do a regiment for them. Although I've certainly painted up like a couple of regiments of mechs over the last, over my lifetime. But for now, I think I'm stood at about 350 mechs at the moment, or something like that. And that's completely fine and adequate, and I'm more than happy with that. But what I'd say is, have a think about that anyway. So if you are like having the painting equivalent of a writer's block, try and tie it to something interesting. Or if you are creating like let's say you've got a group of friends who play BattleTech and you really want to kind of do like a narrative play. Well, let's say, I don't know, I'll pick one at random here. Like, let's say you are running like a Draconis Combine campaign, and you've got something like the Legion of Vega, who are one of the kind of military forces within the Draconis Combine. Well, the first point to, if that's kind of the narrative that you are leading on, and they're the kind of force that you want to follow and paint for, good force by the way, really interesting like color scheme. You can find like the color schemes. First of all, that's probably the best place to start is on the unit. I've just got it in front of me here. The unit compendium, color compendium. Sorry, the unit color compendium. Say it correctly. Where you find like a full list of all the kind of paint schemes and paint jobs for all the kind of BattleTech units. The Legion of Vega, unlike traditional Draconis Combine units, which tend to be black and red, these are white and red. So that's a good place to start straight away if you kind of want to be a little bit lore specific. How then do you get that on the tabletop? What are you painting? So let's say you are going to do a company for that particular like military group. You can go on to something like the unit color compendium and find out the exact colors. Even go so far as to get like the ready-made decals for them, because they've all got their own like company insignia, numbers, things like that. And when, let's say you are creating a company for them, well, firstly, you're going to have to kind of source the mechs and decide what you want. So it's a Draconis Combine force, so you're probably going to find like, you know, Jenners, Panthers, Dragons, Thugs, maybe, you know, like a lot of light mechs usually comprise the Draconis Combine force. So you've sourced them, you kind of know your colour scheme. Rather than just painting them all in that like, oh, I'm just going to paint them all white and red and do it like all regimented so they all look the same. You can do that obviously, but in terms of like the inspiration for wanting to do that and to kind of push forward like your motivation levels to kind of get them on tabletop, just have a think about what each lance like represent. Like maybe like your light scout lance, maybe the mech warrior concerned with it is like not very good, right? And it's maybe been like chastened by like their superiors, and it's kind of been put in like scout duty for a little bit of punishment. So maybe they're like a bit of a rebel, and maybe that their color like coordination is slightly different from the others. And and you know, then you get the pilot cards now, right? Like Catalyst will actually give you the pilot cards with their skills on it. Make those. I mean, I certainly make those. So you get an idea, if you know the tabletop rules, obviously, which you'll need to know, you can then kind of go into the pilot cards and say, okay, I'm going to steal that pilot skill and put it on my mech warrior because it's appropriate. Some of those pilot skills are good and bad, like some of them have positives and negatives. Gives you a bit more flavour to it. You know, maybe have it that it's that the leader of this like scout group is not just a rebel, but like really, even for a Draconis Combine mech warrior, and they are pretty gung-ho and pretty like full on. Maybe they're even more so. So they get like advantages to their shooting or movement, but you've got like an inset rule where they will never fall back. Like they will, if you're playing like morale rules and stuff, they're not affected by it. So it's basically half the missions they're running on are like suicide missions, and the other mechs, maybe it's like piloted by like just regular mech warriors who are like, oh my god, this guy, right? Like, you know, they don't have that rule attached to them. They're constantly trying to kind of dig this person out of trouble and reflect that in like their colour scheme. You know, they're like a scout lance who just are slightly crazy and just always kind of at the thick of the battle. And then the rest of the company like despair of this guy. Maybe that's like a medium heavy lance and maybe an assault lance. And, you know, like build that into your narratives. And just, I mean, I've got no notes for that. I've just kind of thought about that off the top of my head. So do something similar to kind of get those colour schemes, plan that out a little bit within like your wider project before you dive into it. Now, I've certainly done that with the dust counters. I've not necessarily done it with my other forces. Like in terms of my inner sphere, like generic forces, I've not gone into a a deep dive onto which regiment they're attached to, because I want a generic force. I just want things on tabletop that can represent, for instance, the Free Worlds League. Ergo, they are like purple. So it's that simple. You can, if you want, you can go on the on websites like the I keep often, there's too many C's in this word, Unit Colour Compendium, and you can go and have a look at like a specific regiment that inspires you in terms of their like paint scheme, and go and do them specifically. Put your own flavour on it, obviously. But again, that's my kind of final piece of advice. Really, is that you do it lance by lance. And that's the best way to do it. Like, tackle it lance at a time. And I try, over like January, I was basically painting like a lance a day. Not necessarily mechs, but like vehicles and stuff like that. So I kind of get up early, do whatever I needed to do, and then by like 10, 11 o'clock, which is kind of standard with me, because if I'm doing like consultancy work at the moment, it tends to be out in Asia. So I'm up early to kind of do calls, and then kind of as soon as it gets to like, lunchtime in Asia, it dries off. And then usually, because corporate law firms in Asia tend to work very, very late, so I'll then kind of go back online at like 4 o'clock, something like that. So I have this kind of like period in the day where I can just go and paint, and I basically just do a lance, and I kind of be thinking as I'm painting them, I'm thinking about like the next lance that I'm going to paint. So I'd have their colour schemes already in mind and be kind of executing that, and then when I get to the next day, I've got the next one. I'm like, yeah, I want these guys to have like red piping for this reason or whatever, and it just adds so much flavour to like the force that you're creating, what you're doing. And again, it depends on what your ultimate like destination is with this. Like for me, the Dusk Haunters are my like, for want of a better term, they fulfill every single thing I want to do in BattleTech. For instance, I can play them competitively, I can play them narratively. The other forces, though, because I tend to be in an area where BattleTech is not that popular, it's the UK, so everything here is about Games Workshop, pretty much. What I've tried to do is, if I'm introducing new players to the game, I can kind of say to that person, what's your favourite colour? Or, if they kind of say, well, I don't care about colour, I can say, okay, well, do you want to play space Japanese samurais, or do you want to play space Germans, or do you want to play crazy clans with, whatever? Like, I'll kind of try and give them an outlet to kind of to go down to say, well, I kind of like the idea of that, so I'll play those on tabletop. And if it's like their first game, I'll probably just play 2 mechs against 2 mechs. So therefore, I don't need them to kind of be a specific force. They just need to be like general representatives of a particular power within the BattleTech like galaxy. Whereas for the Dusk Haunters, I have got pretty much every mech that I love in that entire reinforced battalion. That's for crunch regions, obviously, because if I ever do decide to play it at tournaments, I can just like cherry pick whichever ones I want, and they've all got a very similar paint scheme. Not just for crunch reasons, though. There are mechs in there that I am not a massive fan of, but I really like the look of. So there are some like narrative elements to that as well. But yeah, like I said, I suppose like the whole ethos of what I'm trying to get at here is just get creative with it, and don't just see it as like a grind. Painting for me is massively therapeutic and meditative. It's something that I think is really kind of underestimated as far as the hobby goes. And I can tell you this from like personal experience, especially because over the last like 5 years specifically, I've had quite a stressful job. And I, on the whole, I deal with stress pretty well and pretty chilled out. So, but I find that painting makes me deal with it much better. Like even better than I probably naturally can do as a pretty chilled out person. And if I do kind of start painting things, and at the end of it, when I've seen it and created it, and I can look back and think that looks just like I envisaged it to look, not necessarily pride or that it looks amazing, but just like that, my what I imagined this to be is now a thing, then you can really take like a source of pride in that. And I think it like, we today in society are so like consumption heavy. We're all such consumers of everything, whether it's like content or food or whatever else, we don't really go to the source of like either creativity or even like practical things. Like, how many of you like grow your own food, for instance? And if you don't, if you don't like ever, if you've never grown your own food or eaten something that you have grown, you're kind of detached from the joy of what you get from doing something like that. It's getting very philosophical, this, but painting is one of those outlets where you are actually creating the thing. So you are no longer a consumer, you are a creator. And I think psychologically that has a really important like dimension to the human psyche that is really being lost now, because we are such consumers of everything. And that's what I always say to anyone if they've got kids who have got like, kids who have got things, maybe something like autism, or maybe it's not even autism, maybe it's just like, like behavioural problems, or they're getting frustrated or something like that. I say to all of them, I'm like, get them into the hobby, right? Like, if you can get someone young from like an early age, give them like, or help them to get a creative outlet, it will be so beneficial for like their mental health, and like almost like that, like rounding someone's like human experience or whatever you want to say. Because like I said, we are so like addicted to digital and consumption that I think painting something is just it's like, I mean, if you go back in like ancestral history, like the first things we ever discovered from like human beings were like going back like a long time, hundreds of thousands of years. We found like cave paintings and like graves with like flowers in them. So someone had obviously had like a creative outlet or like some kind of ceremony or ritual around either like the natural world around them, whether they were like painting that, or whether they were kind of putting flowers in a grave to kind of mark as a respect for someone that had recently died. There's like a creative, colourful element to that I think human beings like naturally gravitate towards. And I think that's one reason why the hobby that we are kind of engaged with here is just, there's a real primitive element to it, like having those colours and making them like shine and work for you should be and is something that I think human beings really kind of like naturally, for whatever reason, gravitate towards. And it's something that again, not to go on too much about this, but it's something that I think is being lost because of how consumption heavy we are. Like, we expect corporate companies to kind of make our art that we consume. Well, actually, you should be the one creating the art, and that's what the hobby can really like do for you. Whatever outlet you've got in that, whether it's the actual painting, even like tabletop play. I mean, there's a creative element to that in terms of like tactics and like a real thing, right? Like something you can actually pick up and move, as opposed to like doing point and click on a mouse on something that is very abstract in terms of a computer screen. So yeah, and I'm kind of going off into an area now that I probably shouldn't, but yeah, like I say, painting, good. Try to get up to a what I think that we term in the hobby tabletop like appropriate or tabletop ready, where you know that you can put that on a table, and what your opponent, if they've never met you before, will probably look at the models and go, they're pretty cool. Like either the paint scheme or the decals you're using, or they'll be able to tell immediately as well. There's a story behind it. I've had, with the dust counters, I've shown like photos of that on like Reddit and Twitter, and like I speak to a few people now in the community, mostly like Americans and Australians, and they'll say, one of them said to me, on like a personal message, I can tell that there's like a story behind that, and it's like, yes, there is a story behind that. So if you've done it, people will automatically like gravitate towards it, and it's just like, in terms of like your tabletop experience, it's a very good icebreaker. Like, they'll know as well that you're serious about it and that you have like passion for it and enjoy it straight away by just looking at your models and realizing that they have had like time and love and like creativity put into them, as opposed to just like spray painting them blue and like sticking them on tabletop. Which again, I don't mean this in a snobby way, but I think it's, what's the point in going to kind of buy these models and spend all the kind of the money that we have to spend on this hobby and then not making them just look good? That would be kind of my ultimate kind of way of thinking on this anyway. Anyway, that's it for today. Just two other things. One, I am going to, over the next few weeks, I'm going to run a series of vlogs, lectures, whatever you want to call it, on the shady organisations within BattleTech. And I'm really looking forward to do this because it's probably my favourite subject in BattleTech, are like the shady, crazy organisations. I'm going to tie some of it together with like real world stuff, so hopefully people will find that quite interesting. Secondly, when I've finished that series, I will actually do like a full like synopsis of my like hobby is where it stands at the moment in terms of the project management, because I think by that time I will have finished painting everything. My aim is to finish everything by like the start of March, which is pretty much like a month away from where I'm recording this. So I will do that eventually, and that will kind of bring like me to full completion over a 6-month journey or whatever it will be by that point, from the first time I did like a project management video up to the actual fulfillment of said project. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there, so I'll thank you very much for watching, and I'll hopefully catch you again next time.